and start the presentation.
I am Lynn Baxter, W0LTB. I've been licensed for almost 40 years, so it's been a while. I'm also a CPA professionally and have done quite a bit of research with respect to amateur radio and nonprofit status. It may be that your club operates as a nonprofit. It may just be an unincorporated association. The benefit of having nonprofit status is you can have deductible contributions if it's set up correctly. So we'll look at some of the more recent developments with the IRS and see if it would be appropriate to anybody's club.
Did that go to the slideshow?
Yeah.
Slideshow's over there. Okay.
There you go.
So we should be good to go. So this is an updated presentation from one that I gave about 5 years ago. The IRS is in quite a mess. They suffered pretty drastically from working from their homes and not having normal communication with the public. So any dealing you may have with the IRS may be a pretty difficult thing right now. So just be a little bit patient. Some of the dates that I quote in here may or may not be realistic in the current environment.
Tell them how bad it is from the tax preparer's side.
From the tax preparer side, I have had situations where I have power of attorney for a client and I call the IRS on a particular hotline that they have for practitioners. And more than once I have had, we're busy today, call back another day, click, which is not a good way to conduct business. And the clients don't seem to have a tremendous amount of understanding, so it's a little bit difficult. So just be aware, since the nonprofits don't raise any revenue, they tend to be a little bit kind of pushed behind some of the other matters. So just be patient if you have to deal with the IRS. The history of nonprofits: they were initially social benefit organizations. There were outreaches largely of religious organizations. You think of your local hospital, and it may have been, 50 years ago, it probably was St. Mary's Hospital or some such religious designated hospital. A lot of them have been bought up by for-profit organizations now, but they were founded initially as an outreach of a religious organization. Tax implications arose once there was the 16th Amendment to the US Constitution that allowed federal income tax. Congress provided for deduction of charitable contributions starting in 1917, although it wasn't a big deal at that point in time. After World War II, the importance of nonprofits grew and had large growth, and has had large growth from the 1960s until the current time. This is a listing of all of the exempt organizations that exist. The one that we're going to be primarily concerned with tonight is the 501c3, which is one that deals with religious, educational, charitable, scientific, literary, testing for public safety, to foster national or international amateur sports competition, or to prevent cruelty to children or animals. There are also social leagues. Some clubs are organized as 501c7, which is a social and recreational club, with the purpose being pleasure, recreation, and social activities. You do not file the same application to become a C7 as you do to become a C3. Another major issue is if you make a contribution to a C7, don't take it as a contribution on your tax return, because that is not what the intent is. You can go all the way down to the bottom of the list, and you have political organizations, and they're their own animal. So if you have anything to do with it, you need to learn those rules pretty directly. But what we're concerned with tonight is the 501c3, and if the 501c3 is appropriate for your club or other organizations you may be part of. Kind of the caveat is, like any tax benefit, there is potential for abuse. You've got to be careful not to run afoul of the rules and regulations of the IRS as it relates to nonprofit status. I hope to give you some points to ponder, but in no way is this information adequate to address all issues for the amateur radio community and tax matters. And I'm only going to address federal issues. I'm not up to speed on all the 50 states, and sometimes there are even issues dealing with individual communities. I'm not an attorney, and I don't offer any legal advice. And this, I have mentioned earlier, the IRS is very far behind on its processing, and who knows when they will return to normal operations.
Whatever that is for them.
Yeah, using the term normal as sort of a joke. And I've alluded to the advantages of the 501c3 status. An entity granted 501c3 status is exempt from federal income tax and is permitted to receive tax-deductible charitable contributions. In order to be recognized as a 501c3, an entity must meet certain criteria and must file an application with the IRS, which is reviewed and approved or denied. Additional benefits may come to those organizations so recognized. State and local governments may allow exemption from sales tax and in some cases property tax. Also, the United States Postal Service offers reduced postal rates for certain nonprofit organizations. There are 3 criteria for being granted exemption under 501c3. A 501c3 must be organized as a corporation, trust, or unincorporated association. The entity's organizing documents must limit the purpose of the organization exempt activity and cannot expressly permit prohibited activities and you must permanently dedicate the assets of the entity to exempt purposes.
So what does all that mean?
So in other words, you can't conduct any kind of illegal activities.
Oh, no.
You know, you can't grow pot in Wyoming. Some states that's not an illegal activity, but in Wyoming it still is. And your documents must say what the purpose is, and you can't basically run afoul of what your organizing documents say. So if your organizing documents say that you're an amateur radio club designed to educate the public about amateur radio and to promote amateur radio, that's what you need to be doing. You can't be running a bar. It seems pretty obvious, but there have been more than one organization that gets their exempt status granted and then they run afoul of it. The operation of the entity must promote its exempt purpose. It must refrain from participation in political campaigns and refrain from any substantial lobbying activity. Individuals must not gain any personal benefit. The term of law is personal inurement from the operation of the entity. It cannot conduct illegal activities. You know, sometimes there's some kind of question when you have a political campaign and say a church has a candidate in to speak about a certain aspect. They need to invite all sides of the equation. All sides of the equation don't have to respond, they don't have to appear, but they must be invited to avoid running afoul of this political campaigning. The entity must have one or more exempt purposes. 501c3 stipulates that those purposes need to be charitable, educational, religious, scientific, literary, sports competition, preventing cruelty to children or animals, and testing for public safety. Most commonly, 501c3 entities are charitable, educational, or religious. This is one of the publications that is very useful when you get to the point of wanting to apply for exempt status. IRS publication 4220 lists under the charitable advancement, education, or science. They also list lessening the burdens of government. Under the educational purpose, there can be mention of conducting instruction and teaching. Certainly, a lot of radio clubs are often involved in such endeavors. An existing club may already have its employer identification number. An EIN is basically the equivalent for a business entity of a social security number that an individual has. To apply for such an employer identification number, you need to fill out the SS4, and that's available on the IRS Forms website. It's pretty straightforward. You can do it online, you can apply online, you can get the number directly and have it pretty much instantaneously. The thing that's important to remember is a club needs to have its own existence. A club bank account should not be held in an individual's name. That can get you in a kind of a big mess. The individual, I knew of one club where the bank account of the club was in the name of the individual. The individual passed away, and there was a major confusion as to whose money this was, and the club ended up having to just walk away and leave the bank account and say, okay, it's done. So they had to pretty much start over. You can also have situations where if somebody wants to behave inappropriately and thieve money, it's a whole lot more clear when it's in a club account and not in an individual's name. So if your club doesn't have an employer identification number, that's something that you should do no matter whether you get exempt status or whether you operate as an unincorporated association. The SS4 is just a single sheet form, basically wants the legal name of the entity, mailing address, responsible party, and that responsible party needs to provide their personal social security number. And then it wants to know what the type of entity is. If you are a corporation, you check the corporation box. Other nonprofit organization, there's that box. You could check unincorporated or association, but it's very important to get this application made. Before you apply for exemption, you need to make sure that your governing documents are appropriate, that the club is basically in the ballpark to be a 501c3. Certainly, many ham clubs can look at the two aspects of scientific and educational. Depending on the focus of the club, either could apply. If your club doesn't have that kind of a focus, perhaps a 501c3 status isn't appropriate. If that's the determination of your governing board, then you may want to just continue the way you're currently operating. Once you determine that the club is appropriate for the 501c3 status, you will need to be certain that your governing documents are up to date and file any needed amendments to your corporate bylaws with the state Secretary of State or other state official as appropriate. The Secretary of State in most jurisdictions is the governmental official in charge of maintaining corporate records. Make sure that the financial records, income statement, and balance sheet are in order. Perhaps that pile of bank statements in a shoebox doesn't fit that requirement. The financial records not only need to be up to speed for the application, but you need to keep them up to speed. One popular accounting software product is QuickBooks. Or you can design your own software for spreadsheet using a spreadsheet product such as Excel. If you're computer challenged, adequate records can be maintained with pencil and paper.
Hams are not computer.
Imagine that. And the other ham sitting here in the room with me says, hams are not computer challenged. Okay, this one is. When do you file the 1023-EZ? If you file within 27 months of the formation of the organization, the exemption will be retroactive to the formation date. If you've missed that date, don't dismay. Once approved, your exemption will be in force as of the date the exemption was granted. In some cases, retroactive approval can be granted. The next thing to do is to look at the questionnaire associated with the 1023-EZ instructions. The IRS is getting big on basically having questionnaires as their means of ferreting out a lot of information. This questionnaire is 7 pages. The form itself, the 1023-EZ, is only 3 pages. So you can kind of determine what the important thing is. But you must have the questionnaire complete and have the answers be appropriate in order to go on to the 1023-EZ. The 1023-EZ, which is the application, the short form application for nonprofit status, must be completed online. There are handouts of the eligibility questionnaire and the form available.
Where are they available?
This is the first page of the eligibility questionnaire. All this can be found easily if you get on irs.gov and look at 1023-EZ instructions. So it wants to have you project that your annual gross receipts will be below $50,000 and want to know if your asset value is below $250,000. You're not eligible if you're formed under the laws of a foreign country. And if your mailing address is in a foreign country, you have certain other restrictions. And then they want to know if you're a successor to another trust or nonprofit organization. This is the first page of the 1023-EZ. They call it a streamlined application, but you can't even file this unless you answer the very first question, is to make sure that you have complied with the questionnaire, the 7-page questionnaire, that everything is appropriate for 501c3 status. On the 1023 EZ, it's pretty straightforward. Name, mailing address. Here's that employer identification number, contact person, officers, directors, website, the organizational structure, the state of incorporation. Page 2, they want to have you provide the NTEE code, which is basically a classification. And I have printed out and put on a slide here the ones related to education and science and technology. So you would need to look and make sure that your NTEE code is appropriate for their status. Page 3, there is a request for reinstatement. The name of the game is you don't want to be kicked out of being a 501c3 once you're there. So you don't want to have that. Signatures appear on page 3. You submit the form and the requisite $275 user fee. Used to be $400. I look for it to go back up again with the current environment. You may have a request for additional information from the IRS. Earlier effective date, if you want to have a retroactive exemption. If you do that, you have to file the full Form 1023, and it's not a fun thing to do. Hopefully you will receive a determination letter stating that your organization has been recognized as a 501c3, and this is where I'm overly optimistic. This process can take as little as a month or as much as 6 months. And at this point in time, I would probably say it could take as much as 2 years. There are annual information filing required of a 501c3. 501c3 organizations that have income of less than $50,000 per year can satisfy their annual filing by submitting what they call an e-postcard known as a 990N. If you don't meet that requirement, you can file the 990EZ or a straight 990. And like the regular 1023, if you can avoid it, you want to avoid filing the straight 990. Other filings that the club may be responsible for are 1099s for contractors that may do work for the club and for prize winners in drawings at Hamfest. One club that I was dealing with had a very, very good idea when it came to their prize winners. The prize winner should fill out what they call a W-9. And it basically provides their name, address, social security number, so that at the end of the year, the club can give them the 1099 for their prize winning. It's much easier to get that filled out when you're standing there holding their prize in your left hand and handing them a form with your right hand, and they're much more likely to get that completed. It's pretty difficult sometimes to get people to provide that information once the whole concept is down the road. And once you're approved, you need to provide receipts to anybody who donates an amount of $250 or more to the organization. That receipt should state that the donor has received no goods or services for their donation. I don't know whether any of you have any dealings with public radio or public television. They're famous for giving away prizes with the stipulation, you give $250 and you get a prize that's worth $50. Their letter for receipt should basically say that you have donated $250 and you received $50 in goods for that donation. So your deductible contribution in that case is only $200. So the same thing is true if the club has that type of thing. Also, please note that if a person donates goods, say for example, if you have a club member that passed away and their estate donated all their radio gear to the club, you must leave it to the donor to value that donation. Many of us have given items to Goodwill, and you know that when you get a receipt from Goodwill, they hand you a blank receipt. It's your responsibility to value that. They may say that you donated 4 boxes. Now, I'm not suggesting that you tell that person from the estate that you aren't going to help them value that equipment. You may suggest that they look at eBay and see what equipment is selling for. Look at ham trader sites to see how things are selling to get a value. You need to be really careful before accepting the donation of a motor vehicle or a boat. Probably not likely, but there are all kinds of crazy things on that one. Nothing in this presentation is a substitute for competent professional help. Professional help may come from an attorney, learned in this area of the law, and or a CPA, and or other tax accountant who has knowledge of the process. Not every attorney, CPA, or tax accountant has knowledge of this process. So we have a little bit of levity. We have the world's bravest man walking a tightrope, juggling chainsaws, wrestling with an alligator, and then he figures his own taxes. Then we have a guy sitting at his desk with a sign behind his desk saying Americans for abolishing the IRS. And he said, I wonder what's taking so long to approve our 501c4 exempt status. Well, he may be waiting a while. At this point in time, can entertain questions.
Nothing in the chat yet.
Has everybody gone to sleep?
I don't think so.
Hope not.
Can you lower your screen? Your share, stop your share?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone with questions? Okay, Dan, you want to handle the hands? Okay, I got one in the chat. If a club does not seek determination as a C3, do they still have to file a 990N?
No, they don't. A 990N is only appropriate when it is a 501c3.
Okay. And can you discuss issues with raising funds for a nonprofit?
It's much more clear when you have a nonprofit. You have to be careful not to have too much money spent on the fundraising aspect. Certainly you can solicit, but you need to avoid professional solicitors.
Okay. Is there a limit on the bank balance that you can be carried over each year?
No.
Okay. Do you know if any Aries group has ever gotten a 501c3?
I do not know.
Okay. Okay. I know. I think there are a few Aries groups that have, because they declare themselves as clubs, and that's how they handle it. Because I know that the bylaws, some of the clubs down here that did get 501c3s had to do a massive rewrite of their bylaws to comply with the rules. That was one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah, you want to make sure the bylaws are appropriate to the law.
Okay. And someone said a comment, you have to pay attention to the details. It's
Exactly.
not hard, but it's very tedious, which is true.
And depending on your state requirements, you have to sometimes say that you have a for example, if the club would cease to exist, you have to have stipulations of who gets the funds. And
Mhm.
it has to be another exempt organization.
Okay. Donations of cars and boats are bad. What about trailers such as former police communications trailers?
There's not, as long as it doesn't have a motor, there seems to be less interest in problem from that.
Okay. So trailers are good then. Okay, that seems to be most of the questions in the chat. Dan, do you want to handle the hands?
Sure, Tim, we're in Connecticut. Got your hand up. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. One of the clubs I'm a member of was first organized in 1952. And according to Connecticut, it's a nonprofit from way back then. Would it make sense for us to apply, meeting all the criteria for a 501c3 now, or should we disband the club and start a new club in order to apply for the 501c3?
I have seen it handled both ways. If you don't have a lot of history of people wanting to deduct contributions, I would suggest perhaps going ahead and starting a new club.
Mhm. Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
okay, you're quite welcome. Thank you. Marty, go ahead and take it away.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. A couple of comments. First, yes, Aries groups can form 501c3s. We did that for Los Angeles. I described that in my talk on this subject back in April. Second, one of the other benefits that, in addition to the deductible, status of donations, is that 501c3 status is often an entry hurdle for applying for grants and sometimes for the use of public facilities. So there are a couple of other reasons that one might want to jump through those hoops and get it. As far as an organization that goes way back years, we had one of those. Typically, the bylaws were written in such a simple way that they would not contain some of the explicit language that the IRS expects to see in a 501c3 application. So without necessarily disbanding the group, what you can do is simply adopt a new set of articles and bylaws that include the appropriate language and limitations, and get the members to vote on it, get it approved, and then you're off and running. You don't necessarily have to throw the whole thing away.
Good point.
Okay, I don't see any more hands. How are we doing over there in the chat there, Barry?
No more questions in the chat right now.
Huh. Well, okay.
She did a good enough job. She covered everything.
I think so. You did a great job there, Lynn. Appreciate this.
Thank
And
you.
to your helper there in the background.
Yes, my technical advisor.
Your technical advisor. Okay. We're kind of dragging our heels a little bit, see if there's any more questions. Are there any comments out there?
Raise your hands or ask in the chat.
Okay, I don't see anything.
The questions, the copy of the presentations will be emailed out probably tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's the plan. Well, if you would like there, Lynn, could you email me your presentation in a PDF form, just send it to me, and we'll include that for everybody to be able to follow through with this later.
I will send that this evening.
Okay.
And Larry has his hand raised now, Dan.
Oh, he certainly does. Okay, Larry, take it away.
Yeah, I know they're blaming COVID for everything, but do you think the IRS is just increase their incompetence? That's why it's taking so long for everything?
I think they were pretty incompetent to start with, but it's not gotten any better. I talked to one agent one time and I could hear his dog barking in the background. So I knew he was working from home,
Well, you can't be sure.
but I guess I couldn't be sure.
He could be homeless and trying to work from the street someplace.
Could be.
He is boss.
Okay, is there any more hands? Is there any more anything in chat?
We're good in the chat right now.
Okay, let's just open it up for open comments. If you got something to say or comment on there, we don't have to raise your hand, just jump in there. Nothing. Okay, well, you did a great presentation there, Lynn. I really appreciate you coming aboard and doing that.
Well, thank you.
And judging from the no questions, I would say you did a pretty thorough job. Thank you.
Everybody's asleep.
Everybody.
No, this is something that we've been trying to do for a while, and lots and lots and lots of people are very interested in doing this now. So it's very important that we get it the right way.
Yeah, the last time I gave this, I gave it at Nearfest in New Hampshire. But we lived in Ohio then, so it wasn't quite the drive that would be from Wyoming.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting club that you have kind of organized with a Zoom meeting and people scattered all over the country. How did this begin?
I do have a quick question. Do you have any report or any comments on clubs that have not been successful, that did not have a good experience once they filed and went through all of this? What sort of pitfalls are there that might cause the cons to outweigh the pros?
Usually they come up with pretty clear, explicit reasons that they want additional information. Sometimes the additional information isn't provided in the form they wanted. I think in most cases, they manage to get it worked through.
Are there any disadvantages to getting?
There's really no disadvantage to being a 501c3 if you get it approved.
Okay.
Marty, you got your hand up. You want to pop in there?
Yeah. As far as pitfalls, the main one is you need any club that does this, any group that does this needs to have some person, some position designated to be your compliance officer. Now that could go with the treasurer's job, it could go with some other job, it could be a separate position, but somebody needs to make sure that these things are filed on a timely basis. The 990N is a piece of cake. You can do it in 10 minutes.
Right.
As long as you have the basic, gross receipts information and so on. However, if you let it go for more than 3 years, you'll lose your exempt status. And we have a club that happened to. The treasurer died, somebody else took over, and they didn't realize what they had to do. By the time I found it, they'd already lost their exemption. So we're in the process of revising updating our bylaws and articles and everything and bringing it back to, breaking it back into compliance. But you have to keep records. You have to make sure that all your documents are filed on time, not only with the feds, but also, of course, with your state taxing agency, if that's applicable. Also, remember that your at least 1/3 of your average gross receipts need to be provided by the public. Now, the public can be, a bunch of small donations from members. It can be from other 501c3s, from governments. But if you're funded basically by one huge donation from an individual, like from somebody's estate, that could throw you out of that compliance and not, so you would no longer qualify as a public charity. You'd still be 501c3, but now you'd be a private foundation. If you're a private foundation, you have additional rules in terms of mandatory disbursements for exempt purposes every year. So those are the pitfalls I'm aware of.
Yeah, I took over being the treasurer for a homes association we live in, and they had gotten their letter saying that they had an annual filing requirement. They hadn't filed since 2014. So I'm in the process of trying to say, gee, IRS, we're very sorry. We won't let this happen again. And I have yet to get that resolved.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to comment here. It looks like Rick Hillstead put a comment in there asking to get a copy of your presentation. What we do here is, as soon as I get the copy, I'll include it with, I'll send out a link to this video tomorrow, and it will include a link to her presentation she's got tonight. As soon as I get that in my hot hands, I don't know. You say you're going to send it to somebody else. That somebody else has got to send it to me before it gets out there. But everybody will have a copy of that, and also get a copy of the comments and such that's been in the chat.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And Lynn, I want to thank you. You did an excellent job. And part of my reason for asking for a copy is I would like permission to show this to my club. If you can provide it in a format where I could show it to my club. I look at the faces here and there's an awful lot of gray hair on this screen, and I'm one of them. And my club is an old club. I'm with Jasper Radio Club in Jasper, Georgia, and I'm fairly new to the club. But when we talk about 501c3 and incorporating and so on, everybody says, well, we've talked about that for years, for years. And in some cases, maybe decades, they've been talking about it. And so, you know, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And my biggest concern about doing this is towing the line, accepting the responsibility that if you become a legitimate 501c3, you have to behave like one.
Well, I think too, it might be useful to have a job description for the treasurer that includes this 990N.
Right, right. Because often in our clubs, the treasurer is a pretty good bookkeeper on paper, but not necessarily someone who has all of the skills or desire to be the appropriate sort of gatekeeper.
I got another question from the chat, Jan.
I'm going to answer one thing of Rick. Rick, all the things we're doing here every week, we do this twice a week. We got them out there. We've got several ways of getting to them. They're on YouTube. They are all available for club use and such. You download them and use them. That's what they're there for. You don't need special permission. We've jumped through a lot of loops, and that's where we're sitting right now. And so that's what they're for. So share them with your club, share them with your organization. That's what it's all about. Okay, back to you, Barry.
Okay. So Michael wants to know, would you recommend the club have a fidelity bond?
Depends on how much it costs. You know, those bonds used to be pretty inexpensive. And the last time I heard for a fidelity bond for an organization with about $10,000 in the bank, they wanted $250. So that's a pretty steep bond. So the club needs to weigh the pros and the cons.
Okay.
Well, that ties into another question that I have that may not be for this particular topic, but that is insurance policies for such as field day. I mean, we have a fairly massive field day event, and we've got people shooting, you know, charged cannons with lines over trees and antennas falling down and being raised all over everywhere. And you know, everyone is good and friendly until lawyers get involved, until someone gets hurt, and then the world changes. That if someone really does get badly injured, you know, people who you thought were your best friend may be out of their control entirely. And so,
I know of a club in the Northeast that has a bond or has an insurance policy strictly for their 3-day hamfest.
Yeah.
So it may be the same for field day.
There's been lots of conversations over on every side of things regarding that kind of stuff. We're still trying to sort it out. There's no real good answer except to do, as Lynn saying here, have your own private thing going. If you're part of an agency, a government agency or Red Cross or whatever, doing some of the stuff, they'll cover you. But on a private thing, like you're suggesting there for field day and other events, that's a different animal, and there's different ways of handling it, but that's one thing we're still trying to sort out on the area side.
Yeah.
Marty's got his hand up there, so go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, response on that. ARRL's club liability insurance is designed for that very kind of thing. It's typically, I think, a $2 million aggregate policy. The typical cost, unless you have very unusual activities, is about $200 a year premium. And our Aries Los Angeles we've been using that since inception. And you don't have to, and it's cheaper. I'll tell you, I've looked at other liability policies for similar kinds of activities, and it's 3 to 4 times minimum cheaper than you're going to find anywhere else.
I would I would appreciate getting contact information for them. Is that for a single day event or is that per day?
No,
of the
that's for a
event?
whole year.
For a whole year.
The whole year. Yeah, and just go to arrl.org. If you're an affiliated club, just put in ARRL insurance, and you'll find both the property insurance, that is for your equipment insurance, and there's a separate one for club liability insurance.
Great.
And it's all run through a group in Chicago. It's an easy process, and you get binders right away, and you're good for the year. You get an insurance certificate. You can show it to the local jurisdictions if they want to have you show insurance before you can use the park or something else. Definitely look into that.
Will do.
There's other parts of that though, Marty. I might say we had there's been quite a conversation on that on the Aries side. If you are a club or representing a club, your activities are with your club, that insurance is for you. That is a good bargain. If you're not, like a lot of the Aries groups are not part of a club, intentionally not part of a club because it's hard for, you've got several clubs to do that. That is not for them, and that's where it gets to be a sticky point.
Has somebody been turned down as an Aries group? Because we had no problem with that, and we're not a club, we're just Aries, but we incorporated. If
you incorporate, there might be a difference. So the league had the person that was selling them the agent come on and talk to us. He specified it had to be a club type of thing. Went back to the league, and their website was saying something else. We went back and forth, and they actually changed their website because of that presentation. But it still boiled down to the Aries that you can't have an Aries group, for example, and get the and not be part of a organized like a club or something and get that insurance.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry for derailing the topic away from your presentation. I have one more question along your presentation. Are there any templates available that might give us some idea of how to lay out our bylaws or other forms that need to be done? Not that I know of. I don't know of any that are out there.
You might check with NOLO Press, NOLO Press. I know they have a book on forming nonprofits for California, and they may have state-specific ones for your state as well.
Okay.
You know, what you have to do is get the club member like we have as a former IRS agent.
Yeah.
Right.
A good lawyer is very, very important for this.
Yeah, it is.
Or a retired CPA.
Mm-hmm. We're good in the chat, Dan, and I don't think there's any more hands up, so.
Okay, I had to, my dog was begging for attention here. Okay, no hands are up, I see. Nothing in chat.
Nope.
Okay, well, we've had a good presentation. We did go off subject a little bit, but I think it was very useful information. Check it out. Don't take my word for it. Go on the website there with ARL. I think you'll find a lot of information in regards to that on the insurance thing that's be interesting to you. All right, with that in mind, I think we'll close the presentation for the night. Again, Lynn, really appreciate you doing this. It's been a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
Good night.
73s, everyone.
Good night.
Oh, incidentally, after I close this out, if you want to just come right back into the section again, I'll leave it open for a while so you guys can visit and share whatever you want to share with each other. 73s.